Hey everybody, how's it going? Say hello, Sophie. Say hi. Okay. Good girl. Good girl. Yes, you're a good girl. Thank you. Okay. Good girl. You say hi. Oh, hello. Hello. That's Sophie. She is a sweetie. How's everybody doing tonight so far? Ben and Terry and Cheryl. Hey, Butch. Hope you're doing okay. Sue says she is Evelyn sitting tonight, or at least sitting next to Evelyn. Glad you are here. Janice, good evening. Okay, put you down. You relax, okay? No playing right now. Do we have a deal? Okay, that looks like a deal. There you go. Just lay down. Julius, let her lay down. She's tired. Good babies. All right. Terry's having a quiet evening with her little Daisy. Those are good evenings. The Golden Compass. I've seen that. I think that one is should be an interesting watch. It was known when it came out as being a direct attack on Christianity. So I'll be interested to see what she thinks about it. Just as far as the movie goes, I enjoyed it. I didn't really see the blatant anti-Christian themes in it, or really atheism, pushing atheism. But I wasn't really looking for it at the particular time. No, it wasn't the demons so much as it was. Again, I think it was. I mean, it was intentional. Um, I'm just looking at some things that I read. This is the first time, as far as I know, in modern American popular culture that a movie based upon a series of books that is so explicitly anti-Christian has been brought to the big screen in a sophisticated motion picture directed primarily towards children. I'm trying to see which Pullman they're talking about. Okay, the books. Philip Pullman wrote the books. He said of his, was it his own works? He said that he is saying things that are far more subversive than anything poor Harry has said. I think comparing it to Harry Potter, my books are about killing God, and really they are. All three of them, they are comprehensively a narrative about killing God. That's what Pullman said. He compared his books to C.S. Lewis's Chronicle of Narnia. Well, this is someone else saying that. And he described the C.S. Lewis work as morally loathsome and one of the most ugly and poisonous things I ever read. So pretty harsh words. But I think, I think that we can still watch things like that and learn from them. And even, these are pretty strong words. Like I said, I watched it without really knowing all of that behind it at the time I watched it. and it was not nearly as blatant to me as the Christianity themes in Chronicles of Narnia. So I don't know. We're talking about the Golden Compass, Janice. Hey, Susan, how are you doing? Pop over to YouTube. We got people watching. David Clay's over there. Jeff Arnold is over there. Kim Nunez is over on YouTube. Glad to have you all. Guys, you're going to have to stop. I can't do a whole Bible study with you guys playing like that. So far, they're listening. All right, it's 4 after the hour. We'll get started here in just a few minutes. If you want to get your Bibles open or your phones or your tablets or whatever you're using, we'll be starting with Luke chapter 6, verse 17, known as the Sermon on the Plains, a very shortened version of the Sermon on the Mount that we find in Matthew, but probably ironically referring to the same thing. Either that or I suppose it's possible that this was just one of Jesus' sermons that he preached in different places at different times. This version is missing quite a bit of what's in Matthew. That's one thing that makes it much shorter. It's part of one chapter as opposed to 3 chapters on its own. The Beatitudes are cut down from 8 to 4. Nine Beatitudes. I was thinking there was a ninth. There's a ninth that's kind of not like the other. There's a church in Israel on the hill outside where Jesus sat, they think, on the Sermon on the Mount and told about the Beatitudes. And it's an octagonal church. It's got 8 sides for the 8 Beatitudes, but there's really 9 in Matthew. The ninth is just a little bit, doesn't fit the same pattern as the 8th. But we're not in Matthew. We are in Luke, and that's what we're going to be looking at today. There's only 4 in there. Yeah, I don't think well, a daemon is something that runs on a computer, but demons, um, you know, I don't think the use of them in and of itself, it depends how it's used. It's fiction. You got to remember that. I guess what's at the heart of things is the fact that the author admits that he wrote it as a work of not even atheism but anti-theism. But again, I'm not condemning watching the movie at all. You know, sometimes fiction is just fiction. And like I said, I remember watching it and thinking it was an okay movie. So, hey, Ruben, good to see you. And yeah, Ben, I haven't read Piers Anthony's books in a long time, but I enjoyed those as well when I did. I'm still on YouTube, Kim. So I don't know. David and Jeff, are you guys still with me over on YouTube? Kim said she lost me over there. 7 minutes after the hour. We'll get started in just a minute or two. Susan, did I say hi to you? If not, hi. If I did, then double hi. Yeah, David said he's still rocking over on YouTube. So you might just try refreshing if you prefer YouTube, Kim. All right, it's 8 minutes after. I don't see anybody new popping in the last couple of minutes, so we will get moving with the Sermon on the Plains from the book of Luke. Chapter 6, verse 17. He came down with them and stood on a level place with a great crowd of his disciples. So that's interesting because in Matthew, especially, the crowds are enormous, but they aren't really disciples. They're people who are there to be entertained. At the end of the day, they got a good meal, they got some good entertainment, but most of them went away without really believing in the core message of Jesus. We were taught that at the time of his crucifixion, Jesus had around the 200 disciples, or that might even be too strong of a word. 200 Christians, 200 people. No, I think disciples is fair. That is the goal of being a Christian, right? Is to become a disciple. We're all called to be disciples. We're not all called to be apostles, but we're absolutely all called to be disciples. So there were about 200 disciples, history teaches us, at the time of Jesus' crucifixion. So, but here in this sermon on Luke, Luke says that it was a great crowd of his disciples, along with a great multitude of people from all of Judea, Jerusalem, and the coast of Tyre and Sidon. They had come to hear him, to be healed of their diseases, and those who were troubled with unclean spirits were cured. Luke talks a lot about people who had unclean spirits who were cured, which I find really interesting because of Luke's sort of, I don't know if bias is a fair word, but he saw the world through the lens of a physician. And we today, biblical scholars, looking back at the times people were healed of various demons, to bring back a word we were talking about earlier, really seemed like medical cases. And being possessed by demons, is probably what it looked like. If somebody suffered from epilepsy, they wouldn't know that back in the time of Jesus, but they might very well say that they become possessed by demons. So I wonder if Luke's picking up on that all the way back then, or if he's just also really interested in healing, not only in the physical realm, but also in the spiritual realm. But he definitely picks up on it. He talks about outcasting demons in one way or another more than most of the other authors. Hey, Dorothy Collier, good to see you. Glad you're here with us. So, here's the difference. You've got a group of people that came down not to test Jesus or out of idle curiosity, but really to come and listen to Jesus, to hear Jesus, and to be healed by him. So they already believed in the power that he had to heal, and they wanted to hear what he had to say. That's a little different than, like I said, a lot of other times that Jesus is speaking. So in Luke's version of this, people are a little more sincere about their purposes for being there. So the other thing that the exorcism of unclean spirits does is it kind of drives this particular idea that happens on this Sermon on the Plains into the rest of Luke's description of the Galilean ministry of Jesus. In chapter 7, 8, and 9, he talks about exorcising unclean spirits. So in that way, sort of these summary verses of just saying that people came around to be cured of unclean spirits is a way of propelling hearing into action. So, or speaking into action. Jesus speaks about these different sort of concepts of the kingdom of God and who's going to be blessed and who's going to be cursed and that sort of thing. And then goes out and does something, that is what we want the church to be, right? We want to say the right things and do the right things. We want to say the right things and then do the right things. It's not enough to just keep saying the things over and over again. Eventually we have to go out and do. Otherwise the things that we say will become ignored, because ultimately, while people are listening to us, they're also watching us. So I think that's important. And then the other part that we get in this just short introduction, that people had come from all of Judea, all of Jerusalem, and the coast of Tyre and Sidon, is a way of, this is what Luke is all about, right? If we go back to our starting screen, see, it's Jesus for everyone, and that's really what the theme of Luke is. So by saying that these people from all over had come to listen to him, as opposed to just one small select group, we get this sort of universal scope of Jesus' power, that people came from all of Judea and Jerusalem. All the crowd sought to touch him, and Jesus healed all of them. Those words are in there, right? All in the crowd were trying to touch him, for the power came out of him and healed all of them. So it's this sort of universality of the message and the blessings and the healings of Jesus, that they weren't for just the select group that other people might have wanted it to be, that it was genuinely for everyone. Okay, so now we're going to move into Luke's versions of the Beatitudes. Just a second. Okay. Try to get back to chat. There we are. So he looked up at his disciples and said, "Blessed are you who are poor, for yours is the kingdom of God. Blessed are you who are hungry now, for you will be filled. Blessed are you who weep now, for you will laugh." And then in a, I guess, similar vein to Matthew's 9th beatitude, this one's in a slightly different format. Blessed are you when people hate you, and when they exclude you, revile you, and defame you on account of the Son of Man. So you can't just be hated. That's not the in and of itself enough. You have to be hated on account of the Son of Man, because of your beliefs, because your beliefs set you apart, set you aside from others in your community, and people are jealous of that, or don't understand that. And then Jesus continues, "Rejoice in that day and leap for joy, for surely your reward is great in heaven, for that is what their ancestors did to the prophets." So a couple of things that I want to point out about this, especially compared to Matthew's Beatitudes. Matthew's Beatitudes are all in the third person, and they also really temper down what we would call this, oh my goodness, there's a word for it. Oh, I want it. So hang on a second. Liberation theology. Couldn't think about it. Couldn't think of the word. So in Matthew, for instance, if I recall, the beatitude is, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of God." So it's less personal because it's third person. It's not necessarily speaking to the crowd. So, I think the difference is the crowd that you can imagine. When Matthew is giving the Beatitudes and Jesus is saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs will be the kingdom of God," it's almost like he's talking to a crowd of more well-to-do people and telling them, you don't have it all. You need to have the heart of someone, recognize that though you might have riches, you might have land, you might have servants, you might have all those things. If you're poor in spirit, that will be rewarded later on. In Luke, it's much more direct. It's in second person, "Blessed are you," and he takes away the part that make it easier to handle, really, to not realize that there might be something wrong with you, because he said, "Blessed are you who are poor," not poor of spirit, "for yours is the kingdom of God." And what is the hungry Matthew Beatitudes? I'm not going to go through all of them, but I want to show you the slight difference. "Blessed are they which do hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled." So again, third person, And it's not literal hunger, it's hunger for righteousness. Luke is flat out saying this is about the poor and the hungry and the those in despair. It's not about theoretical, hypothetical people who may not be part of the crowd. Christine, good to see you this evening. I'm glad you're with us. Luke is much more challenging and much more in your face. And it's important to realize too that the blessing of the poor doesn't idealize, it doesn't glorify poverty. It simply declares that God has a prejudicial commitment to the poor, and that is something that is in the Bible. I mean, it's filled with references like this. Um, the coming of the kingdom, the eventual return of Christ when everything is set right is going to bring out sort of a reversal of fortunes. Later in Luke, we're going to hear the story of Lazarus and Dives, although Dives is not mentioned in the Bible. That's just a historical record of the rich man. But it's a poor man, a beggar who lies at the gate of this rich man named Dives. But when they die, the poor man, the beggar, is with God in heaven, and the rich man is at an untraversable chasm on the other side. Nothing can be done because he never helped Lazarus. And of course, we get back to this concept that's so important to understand, that they believed in this concept of this Deuteronomistic theology, that if you did good things happen to you. If you did bad things happen to you. If good things happen to you, it's because you were good. If bad things happen to you, it's because you were bad. So Lazarus, in this thing we'll get to in chapter 16 or so, thought that Dives thought that Lazarus had done something wrong, that he was a bad person, and that's why he was relegated to be a beggar at his gates. And so he never helped him. He never felt obligation to help him. And that was his ultimate downfall. And so Luke, especially, once again, because that story will occur in Luke in about 10 chapters, Luke does a really good job of decimating the Deuteronomistic theology. He does it right here. Blessed are you who are poor. Yours is the kingdom of God. Blessed are you who are hungry now, for you will be filled. Blessed are you who weep now, for you will laugh. So it really is about this reversal of fortune ideas. And that's what made Jesus' teaching so scandalous to begin with, because they overturn all of the conventional expectations. The scandal of his ministry was his association with the outcasts. It was on them that he pronounced God's blessing, just as Jacob had pronounced his blessings on his sons. If you remember back into our study on Genesis, thereby passing on God's blessing onto Abraham's descendants. And again, so scandalous is Jesus' message that even as early as Matthew, sort of this revisionist interpretation where the poor became poor in spirit and hunger became those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, spiritualizing the Beatitudes like that grants those who aren't poor access to them, but it also domesticates this scandalous ministry of Jesus. So in Luke, we often think about Luke as a parallel to Matthew because there's so many similarities, and that does a lot for consistency in the story and overall. I don't know if I want to say believability, but it kind of authenticizes the message of Jesus to have it from more than one source. But again, where is Luke getting his material from, right? Because Luke wasn't a disciple. So Luke is getting his material from Mark, where Matthew also got his. He's getting his material from the Gospel of Thomas, which is a book that's not in our canon, but was written down and available to both Matthew and Luke. And they both used stories from the Gospel of Thomas. Thomas is probably the fourth source that we talked about, in addition to Matthew, Mark, and Luke. But anyway, without diving too far into theological literary geekness, I just want to point out that there's a significant difference between the Beatitudes in Luke and the Beatitudes in Matthew. The Beatitudes in Matthew are a very much more domesticated version of what Jesus says in Luke. and Luke was first, I think. So Luke was written between 80 and 90. And Matthew was between 80 and 90. So it's hard to say which came first with absolute authority. But it kind of seems like from this bit that Matthew is the one who's sort of lightening the message of Jesus. And again, it could just be that these are two different places that Jesus preached. And you know what? One of the things that they teach us in seminary when we take our preaching classes is to know who your audience is. And so maybe Jesus knew who his audience was, and not wanting to alienate the people that were there on the Sermon on the Mount, he changed the message a little bit as he preached it. So I don't know. I think it's all very interesting. I just want to point out the sort of radical differences between the two. So now we've got these blessings, okay? And now we're going to have these curses. So woe to you who are rich, for you've received your consolation. So if you're rich here, you've gotten everything that you could want. And you know, this is pretty difficult to interpret sometimes. I don't think Jesus condemned the rich because they had money. I think that God blesses some people with wealth, and the people that God blesses with wealth, many of them, I think, do incredible things with their wealth. I think Jesus condemns people who collect money for the purpose of having it and the purpose of abusing the power that comes along with wealth, as opposed to just condemning people who have money and of themselves. So I don't know. I don't know if this is a universal condemnation for everybody who was rich at the time, or if it really was the people who were rich and selfish, for instance. But woe to you who are rich, for you've received your consolation. Woe to you who are full now, for you will be hungry. Woe to you who are laughing now, for you will mourn and weep. And again, I think even though Luke is much more direct with the physicality of these things, to have money, to have food, to have joy. I don't think God condemns people who have money. I don't think God condemns people who aren't hungry. And I don't think God condemns people who laugh. Again, I think it's when people do these things in abusive ways, when you laugh at somebody else's fate, or you laugh to ignore somebody else's fate, that sort of thing. And then the last reversal, because remember, it was blessed are you when people hate you and they exclude you, revile you, and defame you on account of the Son of Man. The last one is woe to you when all speak well of you, for that is what their ancestor did to the false prophets. So that's outstanding news for me, because I've never had everybody speak well of me. So that's good. That means I'm doing something right. So really, if you just look at all these together, along with what else will be coming in the book of Luke, especially that parable I talked about with the Lazarus and the rich man, more than any other gospel, I think, Luke digs into the dangers of wealth. And it's also interesting, if you go back and you remember when Mary was told that she would bear the Son of God, and she has her Magnificat that she sings. Oh, I clicked a button. I did not mean to click. That's unfortunate. Hang on a second. Okay. It's going to take me just a minute because I screwed up. This is embarrassing. Here we go. Okay, I got it back. The Magnificat I was talking about. Well, in part of that, let me just pull it up. If I'm going to talk about it. This is part of, it says, and Mary said, my soul magnifies the Lord, my spirit rejoices in God, my Savior. But down a little further, it says, uh, he has brought down the powerful from their thrones and lifted up the lowly. He has filled the hungry with good things and sent the rich away empty. So even Mary in her this song that she sings for God, to God, speaks of the reversal of fortune that Luke is really digging into at this point. So I hope that makes sense. So basically, the Beatitudes and woes, and I think in Matthew as well, but especially here in Luke, as I look at it, I think they announce that the end is not yet. And when God establishes a just reign, there will be a radical reversal of the fortunes of the rich and poor. Reminds me of a quote from a movie I loved, The Marigold, the best exotic Marigold Hotel. I don't know if any of you have seen that. But the quote is, in the end, everything will be all right in the end. And if it's not, then it's not yet the end. That's kind of, to me, what the Beatitudes are saying as well. It's one of my favorite quotes from a movie. Everything will be all right in the end. If it's not all right, it's not the end. Gives us a little hope. All right, so I think this is interesting as we move into verse 27. There's sort of a but that kind of comes out of nowhere. But anyway, it says, but I say to you that listen, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you. This is obviously paralleling Matthew's Jesus saying, you have heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. I think I erroneously once said that that's one of the Levitical laws. I don't think that is the case. I admit that I do not have all 663 Levitical laws memorized. But I think that was just a sort of a code of law outside of biblical law. There were other people that had their own laws at the time, and I think that one of those was about that idea: love your neighbor, hate your enemy. Anyway, Jesus kind of goes into just the second half of that here for some reason in the book of Luke. I say to you that listen, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who abuse you. If anyone strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also. And from anyone who takes away your coat, do not withhold even your shirt. Give to everyone who begs from you. And if anyone takes away your goods, do not ask for them again. And then he cites the golden rule: do to others as you would have them do unto you. So as we look at all of these, this this rule, this law that we're given from Jesus to love your enemies has a wide range of meanings depending on the context. So I don't know, like win over your opponent by kindness, take the moral high road, shame your enemy by your superior goodness, deflect hostility or prevent further abuse by offering no resistance, rise above pettiness, or demonstrate a Christ-like character as a Christian witness. So all these things that you're doing, turning the other cheek, giving someone the shirt that takes your coat, and I don't know that this matters, but the idea there is not that someone's physically ripping the coat off of you, but more like from um, litigious action. Maybe they took you to court or something and won your coat. Just give them your shirt too. To sort of put an end to the cycle of action, retaliatory action, retaliatory action, retaliatory action, right? That's kind of the idea. So, but these ideas aren't mutually exclusive. They're not exhaustive. It's just I don't want us to get caught into taking all of these things literally. I've heard so many, I think, poorly done exegetical examinations of things like turn your other cheek. One I heard a long time ago that I think it's interesting. I don't know. I don't think it's right, but basically if somebody hit you, the way they would do it back then is they would strike you with an open palm. And if you turned the other cheek, they would have no way to hit you back other than um, well, they couldn't hit you with an open face with their left hand because the left hand is what they used when they went to the bathroom and they had to clean themselves up afterwards. So people always shook with the right hand, did things with the right hand. So if you turned the other cheek, they would have to backhand you, and for one man to backhand another man would make him seem the one who was performing the action. He would be seen as cruel and inferior and the lesser of the two. So you were forcing the person, if they wanted to hit you again, to do it in a way that would be degrading to them. I mean, it's a great idea. I don't see a whole lot of evidence for that concept, but maybe that's part of it. I don't know. I think we do better by not trying to take it literally and by thinking, what can it mean metaphorically that if someone hits you to turn the other cheek? I think that's more of what it's about. I do have a note here that I wanted to make sure I shared. Okay, here it is. And I mentioned there were other legal codes back at the time. One of the codes, you might know this from sort of historical trivia, but Hammurabi there was a code of Hammurabi which guaranteed the victim the right to recompense, but set limits on revenge. This was the eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth kind of concept where that came from. And there was a quote here I found that said, the end result of the law of an eye for an eye and a tooth for tooth would be a society in which everyone is blind and toothless. And so that's the idea that Jesus is saying here, that he's trying to stop the cycle of retaliation. So I think that's more of what these ideas are about. You know, offering the other cheek, giving your shirt if they take your coat. Those kind of things aren't necessarily literal. And then he says something that is a very good point, and I've always appreciated. If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them. I think Matthew has this in the Sermon on the Mount, but he doesn't say sinners here. He says Gentiles, which is again, Luke is trying to make sure the Gentiles know that the gospel is for them as well. And so here, it's the sinners, not the Gentiles. If you do good to those who do good to you, what credit is that? Even sinners do the same. If you lend to those from whom you hope to receive, in other words, interest, and in particular, sort of usury levels of interest, what credit is that to you? For even sinners lend to sinners to receive as much again. But love your enemies, do good, and lend expecting nothing in return. Now, he didn't mean not your payment, but if you're going to loan somebody money, do it at 0%. And I've always kind of had a rule that if I loaned somebody money, I just expected never to get it back. If I couldn't afford to loan it and not get it back, I couldn't afford to loan it. And a lot of times I haven't gotten the money back, but most of the time I have. But that's what this means. And then he continues, your reward will be great. You will be children of the Most High, for he is kind to the ungrateful and the wicked. Seems like he's kind of weakening his argument there, but nonetheless, that's what he says. He's kind to the ungrateful and the wicked. Okay. Uh, sorry, I think I just processed that. It took me a minute. Um, he's saying that if we are to be like God, which is the point, to be like Christ, who is God, right, fully divine, while also fully human, then we also have to be kind to the ungrateful and wicked. God is kind to the ungrateful and wicked, and so we have to do the same if we're to be ambassadors of God. Be merciful, he ends this section with, just as your Father is merciful. Okay? So now we're moving on to a new section called Judging Others. And these are words that are kind of familiar to us. Do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, will be put into your lap. For the measure you give will be the measure you get back. Now, here, he's literally talking, I mean, I think he's metaphorically speaking, but the literal thing that's going on that he's talking about using as a metaphor is when you took grain in, you would often just fold up your shirt. Probably didn't. Hopefully, I just didn't show my stomach on my Bible study stream. Good, I didn't. You would fold up your shirt and you would put the grain in there. And some people try to fluff it up and make it look like there was more than there was. But if you packed it down, shook it together really good so that you weren't cheating the person that you were selling the grain to, they wouldn't cheat you when you got paid for it. And, probably they're weighing it anyway. So it's a very logical thing. But again, we take the literal meaning and then we interpret it metaphorically. So we just get this idea, the measure you give will be the measure you get back, which I think is a very important concept, not just in Christianity, but in life. Now, here's what I wanted to point out about these that I think is really interesting from a literary point of view. And that is that Luke is writing in the passive voice here, something that is normally not encouraged, even back in these times. It doesn't say, do not judge, and God will not judge you. That's active form, where you've got a subject performing an action on an object, and you are the object. Passive form, you become the subject, and then there's the action. In this case, you will not be judged, but there's no subject doing the action. So this can be interpreted and I think is meant to be interpreted in two ways. Don't judge people, and people won't judge you. And don't judge people, and God won't judge you. Of course, God is going to judge us, but we won't receive extra judgment because we've judged people. Don't condemn people, and those people won't condemn you, and God won't condemn you. Forgive, and God will forgive you, and people will forgive you. Give, and God will give to you, and people will give to you. So I think that we have to try to understand why Luke would choose to write in the passive voice here. And I think the most reasonable interpretation of this is what I've said, that he didn't want us to know exactly who he was speaking of, because it's a both and, not an either or. So I don't know. That seemed a lot more interesting when I read it than it does right now as I'm talking about it. But anyway, what's my note here? Jesus promises that the law of one measure will be invoked, not one measure for buying and one for selling. If the passive again implies divine action, so the commentary author that I'm reading here also thinks that this second person is indicating both the population and the divine action. Just as a buyer might specify that the buyer's measure would be used to ensure that he wasn't cheated, so God will use our measure. And the measured is the standard of our relationships with others will be the standard God uses in relationship with us. So that's really important, which again goes back to to probably why Jesus was saying, when somebody does something bad to you, do the right things to them, because God got blamed for a lot of bad things. Still does today, constantly. Bad things happen. Why did God want this to happen? Is the thing that comes out of our mouths sometimes. God gets blamed for a lot and doesn't get credit for enough. So anyway, Luke just digs right into all this stuff. The ultimate idea, and this is going to come in Luke as well. Luke is going to talk about the Good Samaritan, the story of the Good Samaritan. Luke talks about the story of the lost sheep, the lost coin, and the prodigal son. But especially, I guess, thinking of the story of the Good Samaritan. The idea is to treat everyone like they're a neighbor. Treat everyone like they're a neighbor. This kind of peacemaking partakes of the very character of God. God's love is indiscriminate. God doesn't just love some. God loves all. And again, that goes back to Luke's main concept throughout the Gospel of Luke, that this gospel, this good news, this salvation, this new way of living is for everyone, not just for a few people. Okay. We've got three more, but we're gonna keep moving forward. We don't have to go too deep into these because they're kind of obvious. He also told a parable. Can a blind person guide a blind person? Won't both fall into a pit? A disciple is not above the teacher, but everyone who is fully qualified will be like the teacher. What does being fully qualified mean? It means being a disciple of Jesus Christ. If we are disciples of Jesus Christ, we must be like Jesus Christ. We're never going to be better than Jesus Christ. We'll never be above Jesus Christ, but we should aim to be like Jesus Christ. That's what the word Christian literally means, like Christ. Why do you see the speck in your neighbor's eye? Again, going back to this concept about the neighbor. There are some interpretations of this word that means brother. I think it's cool that in Greek, the word for brother and neighbor are, at least in Koine Greek, biblical Greek, the word for brother and neighbor are very similar. But why do you see the speck in your neighbor's eye, but you don't notice the log in your own eye? And this is, I love Jesus does this. I do this. I'm told it's a bad thing to do, but if Jesus did it, I don't see why it could be a bad thing. But this sort of, I think it's called reductio ad absurdum, where you reduce an argument to the furthest reaches of it. And some people say that's a bad thing. I think it's a phenomenal way of exposing weaknesses in ideological concepts and theologies and philosophies. And Jesus does it here. So it's this sort of the subtle art of exaggeration. Why do you see the speck in your neighbor's eye, but don't notice the log in your own? Or how can you say to your neighbor, friend, let me take out the speck in your eye when you yourself don't see the log in your own eye? You hypocrite, take the log out of your own eye, and then you will clearly see to take the speck out of your neighbor's eye. So again, that doesn't need a whole lot of explanation. We understand what that basically means. We have this human predilection to point out the slightest fault in other people, while being blind to our own faults, right? Even though they may be much greater. That's just that's the way we are with humans. And I also thought this was very interesting. The Greek word here for hypocrite originally referred to an actor, someone who played a role, and that kind of, I think we would define a hypocrite as somebody who says one thing and does something else. But that's what an actor is, right? So originally, hypocrite just meant actor or someone playing a role. And there's actually no, this is Greek. Jesus didn't speak in Greek. He spoke in Aramaic, and the other people at the time that all these stories were going on probably spoke more Hebrew than Greek. But of course, the New Testament was penned in Greek, and so we have this word that exists in Greek, but doesn't exist in Hebrew or Aramaic at all. So hard to say what word Jesus actually used, but the closest translation, evidently, according to Luke and course, he's not the only person to use this word in the New Testament, but was hypocrite, again, referring to an actor or someone who played a role. And then going on to a tree and its fruit, this is how you can know whether somebody is an actor or actually does what they say, if they're a hypocrite or if they're not a hypocrite. No good tree bears bad fruit, nor again does a bad tree bear good fruit. For each tree is known by its fruit. That's what defines what a good tree is. If a tree produces bad fruit, it's not a good tree, because that tree's function, its purpose in society, is to grow fruit so that people can eat it. So if it grows fruit that people can't eat it, it's no good. And that's the same way with people. He continues, figs are not gathered from thorns, nor are grapes picked from a bramble bush. The good person out of the good treasure of the heart produces good, and the evil person out of evil treasure produces evil. For it's out of the abundance of the heart that the mouth speaks. So again, I think that's relatively self-explanatory. We probably don't need to go too deep into that. I want to make sure we don't confuse this with Deuteronomistic theology that, if you do good things happen to you. That's a different thing, because you're trying to figure out what the agent is that's making things happen to you, or who the agent is that's making things happen to you. And the fact is, it's the random nature of life. It's entropy at its core, where without constant acting, order returns to a state of chaos, that sort of thing. But if you are a good person, you will do good things. That is what defines a good person. A good person is someone who does good things. A bad person is someone who does bad things. So just like we define the tree by the fruit, we define the person by the metaphorical fruit that they produce. So if you're out there just producing haters, then that's not what God wants. If you're out there making disciples, then that's good fruit. And that means that you're a good person, that, probably you have received justifying grace and then sanctifying grace, and you're becoming more like Christ. Again, the very definition of what it is to be a Christian. Let me see if I can get rid of this person who is helping us find love on the best dating sites. Okay, I got rid of those over on YouTube. All right, so we are close to the end of the sermon on the plain. I like this last part here. Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and then don't do what I tell you? There's a name that we've come up with in the modern age for someone who asks you what to do, asks for your advice, and then doesn't take it. We call them ask holes. Ask holes, obviously meant to sound like something else, but the idea is that they ask you, what should I do? And then you tell them what they should do, and they go out and do the exact opposite thing. It's a very frustrating thing that happens a lot. And that's basically what Jesus is saying here. Why do you call me Lord, Lord? Why are you professing your faith that I am, this person, but then you don't do what I tell you to? I'll show you what someone is like who comes to me, hears my words, and acts like them. This is what happens. If someone comes to me, they listen to me, they hear me, and then they act on what I tell them, that person is like building a house who dug deeply and laid the foundation on a rock. When a flood arose, the river burst against that house, but could not shake it. It was unshakable because it had been well built. But the one who hears me, the one who comes to me, says they're listening to me, they hear me, but they don't really hear because they never act, is like a man who built a house on the ground without a foundation. When the river burst against it, immediately it fell, and it was the great ruin of that house. Jesus just wants people to do what he says, right? That's why he's there, to teach us, not to teach us how to die. We learn that lesson eventually. We learn what's worth dying for because we see what Jesus was willing to die for. But as I've often said, if the whole purpose of the life of Jesus was the death of Jesus, they could have crucified a baby and not had any ministry at all. That's not what happened. Jesus wasn't sacrificed as a baby. So he died to teach us how to die, but he lived to teach us how to live. So when we go to God and say, show me what it is that you want me to do, and then we get this idea that God's saying, this is all I need you to do, and we say, yeah, I think I'll do something else, well, we're just being a bunch of ask holes. James later will write, don't fool yourself into thinking that you're a listener when you're anything but, letting the word go in one ear and out the other. Act on what you hear. And James was probably referring back to these few verses in the book of Luke and others similar to it. So I wanted to finish this evening with the story that I read, which I think kind of sums all this up. Once there was a man who took great pride in his automobile. He performed all the routine maintenance on schedule. He kept the car clean inside and out. When he could afford to do so, he began to trade cars every couple of years so that he always had a relatively new vehicle. He also traded up, getting a larger, more luxurious car each time. Then he began to trade every year so that he would always have the current model. Eventually, he got to the point where he'd buy a new car, drive it home, and leave it in the garage. He refused to use it because he didn't want to put any miles on it, run the risk of it getting scratched. So the new car just sat pretty, but never used. This could be a parable of the way some people treat their faith, becoming less and less active in church while professing more and more strongly that they're committed Christians. So don't grow your faith to the point where all you're willing to do with it is park it in the garage, lest somebody scratch it, lest somebody dig in and challenge you and you don't know how to answer a question or a problem. That's not what the purpose of faith is. The purpose of faith is to be lived into and out of. The purpose of faith is to act on what you hear and not just hide it away somewhere in a garage. I think Jesus knew it wouldn't be easy for anyone to respond to his call to discipleship. The simple call, follow me, meant a radical change of life. And yeah, that's it. So that gets us through the Sermon on the Plains. And when we come back, we will continue with the ministry of Jesus. He's going to do some healings. He's going to do resurrection. He's going to do some forgiving. He's going to do some outcasting of demons. We're just going to dig into the ministry of Jesus. But we need to keep in mind that this is Jesus acting on what he said, because even Jesus knows that he can't just talk. Just like we're not supposed to just listen and then do nothing, Jesus knows that he can't just talk and then do nothing. So now he's going to walk the walk after he's talked the talk. And that's what we have to look forward to when we come back after you all have an absolutely lovely Thanksgiving. Everybody good with that? Enjoy the session tonight. Have any questions that I can answer for you or try to answer for you? All right, everybody. Well, that's it for tonight. Thank you so much for showing up and being here. I love doing Bible study with y'all. I love interacting with you. I'm really enjoying this. If you are a member of our church and local, please join us on Sunday mornings at 9:30. I teach a class called C.S. Lewis Studies, and it's a Sunday school class, so it's not a Bible study like I'm doing here. There are no shortage of C.S. Lewis books, and so we're looking right now at Mere Christianity, which is probably the best treatise on Christianity ever written, short of the New Testament. We're going to look at some fun stuff after this, the Screw Tape Letters. we have a lot of fun doing that. So if you want to join us with something in person, that's Sunday mornings at 9:30 during Sunday school hour at Oak Park United Methodist Church at 5505 South 31st Street in Temple. So just wanted to invite you to that. Sue, glad you and Evelyn enjoyed the lesson tonight. Um, Janice, happy Thanksgiving to you as well. And Ben, a great holiday to you too. Check over on YouTube. I think that's it. All right, everybody. So that's it. So God bless, Godspeed. And as always, from the bottom of my heart, thanks for watching.